With Missouri's fall camp officially finished, what is the best and worst news coming out of camp, and why ultimately it all adds up to mostly good news for the Tigers, coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. On today's program, I know Eli Drinkwitz expects a sellout in week one, but should he? That would be my question. Let's talk about that, and also Dennis Gates returning to his old scheduling philosophy clearly here for the upcoming season. Before I start the show, I want to remind you, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And again, fall camp for Missouri, it's over. Let's have a little bit of a recap to start the show here. And obviously the worst news out of fall camp, let's just get the bad news out of the way, was Darris Smith's injury. Obviously a bummer, no question about that. But the truth is, with Darris Smith, we really don't know how big of a bummer it actually is. It's got to be a blow, certainly. The guy is one of the most, if not the most, raw, athletically talented kids on the entire team. He's a very large man, large enough to play linebacker and edge rusher, and yet some have said that he is literally the fastest guy on the team, even with Marquis Johnson, among others, with great speed on this roster. So the God's honest is, even though Smith was expected to be part of the rotation at edge rusher, we don't know exactly how big of a loss it's going to be, because for most of his time at Georgia with the Bulldogs, Smith was an off-ball linebacker, so he's making a change in position, and also never got a tremendous amount of action with the Dogs either. So that's the bad news. Let's get that out of the way. To me, the best news by far, it was really two spots. The emergence of Marquis Gracial on the interior defensive line, and also Nic Deloach on the outside at corner as well. Kristian Williams, Missouri's veteran on the inside, said on Gracial, my God, Marquis has definitely matured in a lot of ways, in a lot more ways than you can imagine. He's more bought into the program, he's more bought into the standard, and he just cares about winning. That's the biggest thing about him more than anything, and you can also see it with him just being more focused. He's asking more questions than he ever had, just asking more questions to me than he's ever had as well. So excellent words there from Kristian Williams. And Gracial, again, just to recap, a guy who was very coveted out of high school. A lot of big-time SEC programs were after that young man, including, if memory serves correctly, the Alabama Crimson Tide. He was a take for them. And so he has that special combination of athleticism at his size. Again, if it's all coming together, as Kristian Williams is saying, and I tend to believe when your teammate says and your captain says something like that to the press, I tend to believe it, especially when it's showing up with a lot of first-team reps as well. Now, one thing to keep in mind, the reason I'm putting this in the good news column is because you could put it in the bad news column in one way. If you were going to be a pessimist, you could say, well, I thought Chris McClellan was supposed to man that other starting defensive tackle spot next to Kristian Williams. Well, the God's honest is, I think Chris McClellan, we can still expect him to play about as many snaps as we did before, despite the emergence of Gracial. I don't think this really affects McClellan that much. He may not hear his name called as a starter, but the way Missouri rotates its defensive linemen on the interior, for the most part, Yes, Kristian Williams definitely led the team in snaps last year, but there wasn't as much of a gap between number 1 Kristian Williams and number 4, I believe Realist George had the 4th amount of snaps on the interior. There was maybe a 50 to 100 type snap difference there throughout the entire season. So obviously it matters a little bit, but my point here is Missouri's going to play 4 interior defensive linemen almost certainly. That's what they've done as long as Al Davis has been the interior defensive line coach, certainly, and I would expect that to continue. Locked On Gators, my colleague Brandon Olson, he told me he expects Chris McClellan to be a great addition for the Tigers, so I'm still expecting that. The fact that Marquis Gracial appears to be bubbling up that depth chart and stealing reps from others, well, considering his profile athletically and his raw talent, I've got to consider that a good thing and among the best stories of fall camp for Missouri. And, of course, Nic Deloach as well, the Cahokia, Illinois product, of course, in the St. Louis area. A guy as a redshirt freshman here, I don't think back in spring football, I don't think you would have asked a lot of people on the Mizzou beat to expect much out of Nic Deloach this season. But, again, a young man who is now pushing Toriano Pride, a big-time player. Again, another Illinois, St. Louis area product, but Pride, the Clemson transfer, he's a guy that Missouri wants to be good and wants to give him a lot of reps. So the fact that Nic Deloach is even pushing, that shows you all you need to know. Let's just say I'm pretty sure Toriano Pride got more this offseason in terms of name, image, and likeness than Nic Deloach did. So the fact that he's pushing hard for reps here, again, I'm just using my own intuition here mostly, but I think that's a good thing for Missouri and not so much a black mark, say, on Toriano Pride, as if he's not up to snuff. I think it's more of a positive in terms of Nic Deloach being a good ball player. And as I said just a minute or two ago, a lot of my conclusions I'm drawing here, especially in this first segment, is a lot of my own intuition from following football all of these years. And, well, one thing my intuition and experience and wisdom tells me from following football all these years, of course, is you don't want to make too much of fall camp, coach speak, all of that good stuff. But again, as far as good news goes, the fact that Darris Smith so far is the only serious injury for the Tigers is maybe the best news of all. Along with that, Blake Craig, the Missouri place kicker, he seems just fine. From all accounts in fall camp, he's performed well in the scrimmages, the parts that can be seen by the media and the parts that can't. Eli Drinkwitz seems pleased with Blake Craig. So far anyway, all systems are go with the place kicker. And from my perspective, Craig remains certainly a question mark, just like there's always question marks on any football team, especially with a lack of experience at any position. But for me, again, this is just me. I'm not particularly worried about Blake Craig, and I haven't been all off season. One other interesting note, and again, this is something you got to take with a little bit of a grain of salt for sure. Not knowing the situations, what the offense is trying to accomplish, what the defense is trying to accomplish. But again, this is from most accounts, the people who've seen it in the media and the team itself, is that the defense has been hanging in there pretty good with the offense here during fall camp. It's been a competitive fall camp without question. And to me, that's got to be a good sign. I think you expect, again, with known returning production on offense, I think we have a pretty good idea that Missouri offense is going to be, at the very least, very, very good. Above average to very, very good, at the very least, barring injury. And it could be one of the elite units in the entire country. So if the defense is holding its own against the Missouri offense right now, that should be a great sign moving forward here in 2024. And Eli Drinkwitz has talked quite a bit this offseason about how Missouri likes to set internal standards. Well, one of the standards he's setting for the fans right now is he would like to see a sellout for week 1 in just over a week here against Murray State. Well, should he really expect that? How realistic of an expectation is that? Let's discuss that and a little bit of legal trouble for Theo Wease, this week. And really little might be a little bit too strong of a word. How about minuscule legal trouble? So let's talk about all that here in just a little bit. First, though, got to talk about my friends at Gametime. And if you are still looking for last-minute tickets to the Missouri Murray State opener, well, of course, you can check out Gametime. And Gametime, by the way, has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching and scrolling through thousands of ticket options. Gametime Picks, I'm telling you, this is the new way that Gametime makes it even easier to get tickets and save on more sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. So take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets and football tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And for all you NFL fans out there, I got a great deal for you from my friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and download America's #1 sportsbook. By the way, I still think the Tigers are undervalued at 25-1 to win the SEC. But regardless, again, it's FanDuel.com/lockedon. College football is back, and it's not too late to catch up before the season kicks off. SEC, ACC, Big 10, Big 12. Well, you can get it all from Locked On's stable of college experts by subscribing to the Locked On College Football podcast. Who has a chance to make the playoff? What teams will cause chaos in their new conferences? Everything you need to know all in one place. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the Locked On College Football podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And speaking of every day, well, I think Eli Drinkwitz from here in time immemorial, from here on out, would like to see Missouri sell out every game, every day. In fact, talking about filling the stands for next week's opener, quote, "If we don't sell out the first game, then that shows me that we're not where we want to be as a fan base yet. We need to sell it out. We need to show the rest of the country that we're serious about our program." Now, I have to say, I've gone back and forth on this a little bit. My first reaction to reading that, as somebody who's absolutely going to be there, by the way, I don't know, maybe play an FBS opponent. Is that asking too much to maybe get people into the stands? Because I have a feeling a lot of people who are on the fence are going, Murray State, there's still some other games. I'd rather see Buffalo or Boston College or Vanderbilt, for example, in this month, 4 straight home games. Kind of understandable, frankly, if somebody wanted to skip the Murray State game on an individual level. I totally get that. Not criticizing any of you out there if that is indeed the decision you're going to make, especially if you're driving from outside of town. Easy for me to say, somebody who lives in Columbia, oh yeah, I'm going to go to all the games. Well, cool. Takes me about 15 minutes from here to get into the parking lot. So that's not really a fair criticism. But in the aggregate, though, I have to kind of agree with Eli Drinkwitz, especially when you consider that Missouri right now, capacity is 62,000, something a little bit south of that, I think. So compare that with other places like not even Alabama and Georgia. How about teams that we expect to beat this season, like Auburn, for example. There's just no comparison. Obviously, Auburn is 85, 90,000. So it isn't really expecting that much, really, for Missouri to start selling out these games, I have to admit. In a season coming off a 10-2, 11-2 type season with a Cotton Bowl victory over Ohio State, this is the type of season where you have to cash in. So, unfortunately, while it may not be fair, I think Eli Drinkwitz is right. If Missouri doesn't sell out the Murray State game, or at the very least the rest of these home games this season, that is a little bit of a black mark on the fan base. Maybe the fan base isn't quite where we needed it to be, because it's not as though it's not as though all sellouts are equal. Again, Auburn is selling out 85, 90,000. If we can't sell out 62,000, that is something that people are going to use against Missouri on the recruiting trail. So again, while I'm not going to criticize any individual's choices here whatsoever, Eli Drinkwitz definitely has a point. So if Missouri doesn't sell out the state game, or maybe even some of these other early games here, there probably will be talk about, hey, maybe Missouri just is not SEC level, that kind of thing from the old guard of the conference. I'll say that. But when it comes to Theo Wease, if Missouri actually decides to suspend Theo Wease, well, then we ain't SEC, by golly, because it just means more here, damn it. And I promise you, I don't expect Missouri to have any serious type of suspension or punishment for Theo Wease. You may have seen that Theo Wease was arrested, according to the Columbia Missourian, for failing to appear in court over a $10 failing to wear a seatbelt violation. Now, listen, folks, I try not to get political on this show. I try to stay very much on topic, I think, as all of you everydayers are very much aware here. But you know what? $10 for a seatbelt violation? He needs to appear in court over that? What are we doing here? So can we have him pay the fine, do what he needs to do, move on, maybe make him run a couple laps or something like that. But anything beyond that would be ridiculous. Maybe he sits out the first series offensively. I understand there's some of you out there going, hey, he's a senior, he's a captain, he needs to be more responsible than that. All right, I can maybe get down with that notion, but the idea that he needs to be severely punished at the expense of the team here, I don't think Missouri's going to go there, fortunately. And, well, I think anybody who is going there is taking it a little bit too seriously. Again, I wear my seatbelt. I'm all for it. I'm also a guy who tends to not wear a helmet when he rides a bicycle on the Katy Trail either. So am I into safety? Am I not? I'm into individual choice when it comes to your own safety. That's just me. And I've talked a lot about in recent years how, of course, football, the trend has been the last few years, the last decade or so, of fewer and fewer live reps, live tackling, actual football, you could say, in training camp and in practices lately. But of course, there is something called the law of diminishing returns. You can't go too far the other way. And it does seem like the trend is pushing back in the opposite direction at this point. In fact, Eli Drinkwitz said that Mizzou had more live reps than it has had in any other fall camp during his time at Missouri. He wanted to make camp harder than it's ever been before, in part because he wants to challenge this particular group, and they've got a high set of standards. Well, Kristian Williams, who I've brought up a lot on this show, he said it was a big difference as far as the rep counts, and you got more team periods, more practice with pads. It's been a big difference on that end. I've been in college for a while now, so of course I've got a different perspective on it. But if anything, I feel like that plays a big role into the season. Going deeper into the season, it's a longer season at that. So I feel like it'll translate properly. By the way, Aaron Rodgers of the New York Jets noted that the Jets are doing something similar as well. So this seems like a kind of throughout football trend right now. I know everyone is not handling it the same way, but I remember famously last season, if you follow NFL football really closely, Brian Daboll and the New York Giants hardly did maybe the least amount of anybody in the league. They got off to a bad start last season. A whole bunch of reasons for that, I'm sure, beyond just a lack of live tackling and that kind of stuff. But I'm sure it didn't help. One thing Aaron Rodgers said, some of the older players are enjoying to steal a coaching word, the callus part of trading camp, where you're grinding, building up calluses on your body is what Aaron's talking about there. He says, quote, some people believe that although it puts more strain on you in the training camp, it actually gets you more ready to play when the season starts. And some people believe the opposite. You know how it goes. Whatever teams are having success, people kind of look at their schedule and go, let's do that. So again, I think we're all, as Aaron Rodgers pretty astutely points out there, in my opinion, there is no perfect answer here. And a lot of this is just, people trying to follow the leader, basically, figure out what the winning teams are doing and simply do that. So not a perfect science here by any stretch of the imagination. I just found it interesting that it seems like the trend is starting actually to go back in the opposite direction. So to flip the script on the movie and soundtrack of A Star Is Born, maybe it's not time to let the old ways die just yet in terms of football practice. And speaking of the old ways, it seems like Dennis Gates, who changed up his non-conference scheduling philosophy last season with Missouri, seems like he's going back to the old ways for this upcoming season. Well, I think that's mostly a good thing for Missouri, but also a little bit boring as well, if I'm being brutally honest. Let's talk about that. But first, let's talk about Ibotta, because in the summertime, it's barbecue season, folks. Stock up on all your grilling favorites and earn cash back on every purchase when you use Ibotta. You won't have to choose between burgers or brats. No, you can have it all. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn on hundreds of items, from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's Ibotta in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKEDONCollege. So last season, Dennis Gates and Missouri decided to challenge itself more than it had in year one of the Gates regime in the non-conference schedule. And obviously, Missouri was terrible last season after a fairly magical year one under Gates and company, I would say. But the thing is, while it's understandable that Gates would maybe go back toward a less challenging schedule after last season, really, to me, the challenging nature of the non-conference schedule didn't have all that much to do with Missouri's decline last year. Now, by the time the Tigers started playing Kansas, which was actually not that terrible of a game from the Tigers, by the way, Seton Hall, Illinois, yes, the wheels had kind of fallen off for the Tigers. Caleb Grill's injury, among other things, had started to weigh on the Tigers. And, well, the Central Arkansas victory on December 30th, 2023, still the last win for Missouri. So, fortunately, with this schedule coming up, going to be a heck of a lot easier for the Tigers. In fact, let's bring up that schedule. There's Tamar Bates looking good. So as you can see here, Missouri starts off with a true road game against Memphis this coming basketball season. Now, that's going to be a tough game, no doubt about it. But after that, it's going to be a whole lot of nothing for a while, and a whole lot of home games, by the way, until the Tigers face the Fighting Illini on December 22nd. So again, this is going to be a very home-heavy schedule for a team that has a big-time and large freshman class, a whole bunch of transfers, a whole bunch of new faces. So it seems like the philosophy here for Dennis Gates in playing Howard, Eastern Washington, Mississippi Valley State, Pacific, Arkansas Pine Bluff, and Lindenwood consecutively there, 6 consecutive games at home, is to get ready for Cal and Jackson State. And oh my God, it says Jacksonville State. I thought it said Jackson State there for a minute, and I got nervous. Of course, you may remember the Tigers somewhat infamously lost to Jackson State this past season. So hopefully Jacksonville State does not have the same vibes. But regardless here, I think the idea that Missouri needs a weak schedule to start the season, I think it almost has more to do with experimentation than actual wins and losses. Because if you do look at last season's slate, well, it is fair to say that, hey, maybe Missouri had a bunch of close games there during the non-conference portion of the season to where maybe they couldn't experiment, find out the different rotations as much as they would like to. I think Missouri will certainly, until Cal comes to town on December 3rd, that 6-game stretch there, Missouri should play as many players and as many different lineup combinations as possible. But then by the time the Cal Bears come to Columbia, Kansas the next game, I think Missouri should have figured out exactly what its rotation is by then. Sure, tweak it as the season goes along if you need to, but my point is the thing of Dennis Gates playing 11 and 12 guys, that type of thing, I still to this day don't think that makes any sense whatsoever in terms of actually building continuity and a basketball team that makes any sense. If that means that certain guys aren't going to play at all this season, well, frankly, that's the cost of carrying 15 plus guys on your roster. Not everybody can play. If guys don't realize that, well, that's part of the deal. This is big boy basketball these days. This is still technically amateur basketball, but come on, let's be real. And thanks, as always, for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen today. Now definitely check out the Locked On College Football podcast. Great previews of the upcoming season, the national perspective. If you like this format, you're going to get more of it with Locked On College Football on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So until next time, I am John Miller, and this has been Locked On Mizzou.